is this your next mayor? I'm here with Bradford, who's going to talk about why him.
Thanks very much, Lee. It's great to be here with you this morning. And, I wasn't planning on running for mayor in 2023, but here we are. My name is Bradford. I'm city councilor in beautiful Beaches, East York, just a little bit further east of here. And I am on the ballot for mayor in this 2023 election. My background's in urban planning. I used to work at the City of Toronto in the Chief Planner's Office as an urban planner. And during my time there, I was frustrated with the politics of the debt, the endless delays, deferrals, indecision, and council's inability to move things forward. So I was involved with an organization called Civic Action at the time, which you're familiar with as well. And basically, young leaders here in the city, and they said, you know what, Brad, if you're not happy with the local politics, maybe you should put up your hand and try and make it better. So I ran for council in 2018. I was successfully elected. I've been serving on council for 4 years now, and it didn't take 4 years to diagnose the problem that we need less talk and more action at City Hall, whether we're talking about affordability or community safety, housing, getting the city moving. There's a lot of talk down in the council chamber, but not enough action. So it's time to end the deferrals, the delays, the indecisions. I'll be a strong mayor of action, someone to move the city forward on those key files, and that's why I'm running.
Cool. So, Brad, one of the things I wanted to actually take the time to share with the people who are watching this is, who is Brad, right? You've given us a great overview in terms of the background that you bring, but tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's hard because there's, 70 names on the ballot right now, and Torontonians are going to have a big decision at a time when it really matters for this city. But you know what? I grew up in Hamilton, so don't hold that against me. Raised by a single mother who raised 3 kids on her own. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. We were not a political family. We never had a lawn sign growing up. And, I think that's because my mom was really engaged in trying to put food on the table and try and raise 3 kids. And do all that on her own. And that story is actually not exceptional. That's not so dissimilar from the stories I hear from thousands of Torontonians across the city trying to get by. It's never been less affordable to be here in Toronto. People feel less safe, and it's never been harder to get around. Local government has a role to play in addressing all of those issues. And for me, I've always been passionate about cities. I literally went to school for urban planning for cities. And I got my start in my career working on transportation projects across the country at a consulting firm. I was down in Boston, Massachusetts for a bit working on renewable energy policy. And then I came back to Toronto in the chief planner's office. And that was really exciting for me because, the great urban laboratory in the Canadian context, of course, is Toronto. We're the most diverse city in the world. We're the largest city in the country. And people bet on Toronto every single day, whether you're getting off the tarmac at Pearson to build a business, raise a family, start a new life, whether you've been here since day one, and Toronto's always been home. People have big dreams and hopes and aspirations for this city, but I think we are at a breaking point where those dreams are becoming harder and harder to realize. Like a lot of folks out there, I'm a 1986 model, represent generational change on the ballot. I haven't been here forever, and I'm raising a family in the city, and that's hard too. People are struggling to make rent. They're struggling to pay their mortgages. Job wages have not kept pace with the inflation that's really compromising affordability here in Toronto. And I'm here for the young families. I'm here for the new Canadians. I'm here for the seniors, the folks who are trying to again make it in Toronto because they love this city, but the promise and hopes and aspirations and the dream of Toronto is further and further out of reach. So that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there isn't anybody who would contradict that for sure. One of the things that I've been asking all the candidates that I've been speaking with is Toronto, the good, the bad, the ugly. How would you characterize that?
Well, you know what? I've always been bullish on this city, and I believe in Toronto, and Toronto is really a culmination of the people who choose to call this place home. And if you want to live in this city, I want you to live here. And I think it's important to remember that despite that desire to see people in Toronto succeed, to see the city succeed in a global context, certainly in the national context, Toronto's success is so imperative for the success of this province, the success of this country. I remind other levels of government all the time that 20% of our national GDP, of course, starts right here in this city. So Toronto's success is imperative for the success of the country. But again, those core things that everybody depends on, housing and affordability, the ability to invest your time and your talent and grow a business here, the ability to get around the city, the ability to feel safe in our communities. Sometimes it feels like that's slipping away a little bit for a lot of people. And I'm not going to paint a position or a picture that Toronto is Gotham City. It's certainly not. This is not Gotham City. We don't need Batman. But it does feel less safe, and it's definitely less affordable, and it's definitely harder to get around. And I think in my time as a professional urban planner working at the city, and certainly the 4 years I've spent on council, it has become crystal clear how disassociated and removed the politicians and the leadership are from the day-to-day life of Torontonians. We talk for hours and hours, days and days in that council chamber about a lot of issues that actually are pretty removed from people's day-to-day lives. And so I saw it as someone working within the bureaucracy, so much process, not enough focus on outcomes. I see it as a politician, someone who is seized with trying to create impact and positive change in people's lives. And I survey the landscape, the 25 councillors, the mayor in that council chamber, and there's so much opportunity to make a positive difference, and yet we get caught up in the sniping of partisan politics and people's individual agendas and different groups who are beholden to other groups, and it all comes at the expense of quality of life for Torontonians. So you asked me about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think the good is where we've come from, where we are today, the hopes and the aspirations and the dreams of the city. The bad or the challenge is the fact that success that we've experienced since amalgamation, that's not guaranteed going forward. And if we cannot find affordable places for people to live as table stakes in this city, we run the risk of going the way of the US city, which is a concentration of poverty, a concentration of wealth, and a hollowed out core, and the inability to land the talent and the people who are going to do the jobs that are essential for the growth of our economy. All that stuff starts to fade away.
Yeah. So how can that be addressed under your mayorship?
Well, we're going to focus on getting the basics right. You're going to hear a lot from different candidates who are going to come out and say, oh, this is my housing plan. This is my housing plan. We're going to build X amount of affordable units. We're going to build 200,000 units. No, we're going to build 250,000 units. You're going to hear a lot of that. But it's more of the same, right? It's all talk. You look at our Housing Now program over the past 5 years, 21 sites, 40,000 units, not a single shovel in the ground in 5 years. So, as a practical and pragmatic guy, it begs the question, okay, well, why is that? Why haven't we put a shovel in the ground? Why haven't we built a single unit? And it's because the process is disconnected from reality. The math doesn't pencil. So you have to go out there and work the problem, be hard on the problem, understand, why we're not building housing. understand what's wrong with the process. Why does it take 3 years to get an approval? This is a city that has less than 1.5% rental vacancy rate. We have bidding wars on rental housing in the city of Toronto, and that of course just drives prices up and keeps people out. We haven't built purpose-built rental for 30 years at scale in this city, and there's a lot of reasons. It's certainly not just the city of Toronto. You know, there's a lot of federal tax policy, financing issues, construction costs are through the roof, financing is up, trade shortages. There's a lot of issues, but also the city government is not clean on that either. I mean, we are part of the problem, and there has to be some humility that acknowledges what hasn't worked and a real commitment to go and fix it. The other candidates are going to talk about plans that are, you know, frankly, aren't going to come to fruition. I'm going to go in and fix the problems with the process so that, you know, local government isn't the biggest impediment to building housing, but actually it helps facilitate it. And I think that's how we start to close the gap and turn the tide. More supply, more housing options for more people in more neighborhoods. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We want, I mean, I think that's what every Torontonian wants is action, right? Like I think a lot of people who feel like, oh, why should I vote? Why should they vote during this election? I mean, a big part of why I have the mayoral series is because this is so important. Like Toronto is on that cusp of you're either going to thrive or you're going to be barely surviving, or the inverse, right? So with regards to the affordable housing piece, where can change happen in that way?
Well, I'm the chair of planning and housing, and I've been in the role, you know, since the end of last year, a number of months, and we have done more on that front through my leadership in the past 5 months than was done in the past 5 years. Okay. You know, multi-tenant housing, the third rail of politics in Toronto for decades. Everybody talked about it. We actually did that. We did that right away. That's legalized as some of the most affordable housing. I lived in a rooming house when I first arrived in Toronto, you know, going to school. Not uncommon. It's been contentious, but the idea of just sticking in our heads in the sand and pretending that doesn't exist, that's not good for neighbors. It's not good for tenants. So we're standing up a licensing program to get better outcomes for everybody. And again, that is one of the baseline levels of affordability that is so critical here in the city of Toronto. We did that. Multiplex housing, duplexes, triplexes, quads, those walk-up apartments in neighborhoods that exist in places like this here in Toronto, Danforth, and Beaches, and the Annex, and Long Branch. You know, it's a really important form of housing. I lived in a triple-decker when I was down in Boston, Massachusetts. You see them in New York, you see them in Montreal, and yet 67% of our residential zoning here in the city, that is off limits. So last week at committee, we permitted that, you know, under my leadership. These are the types of changes that will make a difference in closing the gap on housing here in the city of Toronto. And I remind people, there's no one silver bullet to the housing crisis. It's 1,000 points of innovation, and we can't just focus on doing one thing. We have to do all the things, and we have to do it at speed. What you get with a guy like me is someone who knows the housing file better than anyone. I'm literally trained in that space, and I'm also, you know, not afraid to move it forward. Because again, I think the future of success of this city is predicated on the idea that if you want to be here in Toronto, you want to build a business, you want to raise a family, you want to retire here, we want to have you, and you're going to have housing options available to you so that you can realize that dream.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that we were talking about off camera was about the taxes, property taxes, right? Like property taxes are certainly, Toronto does have one of the lowest property taxes comparatively, but we know that after COVID, many businesses, small business, have been impacted by it.
Yeah, it's hard, right? And I always point out, you know, the property tax comparison, the Toronto Star will run it and say, oh, like these are the lowest taxes in the province or second lowest. It's not an apples to apples comparison because we are the only municipality that has rate supported services, garbage and water off the property tax base. You put those back on and you look at the entire number in which people are paying for property taxes and city services here in Toronto, puts us right in the middle. Could we be higher? Yes. Do I want to lead in having the highest property taxes in the province? No, absolutely not. It is about value for money. And so I always like to just point that comparison out, that we're the only ones that have those rate supported services pulled out separately. But, you know, small businesses in commercial property taxes have carried the tax burden in this city since amalgamation. And I was leading the small business task force for recovery during the pandemic. Every Tuesday, I met with the 80 plus BIAs in the city from 3 to 5, and we had lots of conversations about the challenges with the different government programs from the federal government, the province, and the city. And one of the positive outcomes was an opportunity for me to get on the phone with, at the time, Minister Phillips and Premier Ford, later Minister Sakaria, and start hammering out a pathway for a new small business subtax class. And I'm happy to say that with the support of the provincial government, we were able to unlock that small business subtax class so that we stopped taxing mom and pop shop places like this, like here on our main streets, at the same rate that we did commercial downtown office towers. And that was unfair and really didn't recognize the nuance of small business and our main streets here in this city for far too long. I'm not suggesting I'm the only person who ever raised this issue. Tabia and Mr. Carew had been doing great work on this for many, many years. But this was the moment that we got the change done. And those were the types of deep collaboration between myself and local government and the province to actually bring forward a 15% property tax reduction for mom and pop businesses on main streets in Toronto. And it makes a tangible difference. It's not the only thing that we need to do. There's a lot more work for small businesses. We need to remove barriers to help small businesses thrive. And, you know, anyone who suggests that we're out of the woods on the whole pandemic thing, the pandemic may be over, but the challenges still linger. The cost of inflation, the staffing shortages, everything's more expensive. Government needs to be laser focused on how we can create an environment where main streets thrive, because main streets, you know, the way that Main Street goes is very indicative of the success of the neighborhood and the community. And we need to make sure that people who want to invest their time and talent building businesses in Toronto have a fair shot at success. And local government can't be a barrier for that.
No, for sure. What are your thoughts about, you know, the conversation piece about Ontario Science Centre and, you know, Ontario Place?
Well, I can tell you, I was up in Flemington and Thorncliffe Park yesterday, actually. I spent all afternoon up there talking to local business, talking to residents, and I can tell you they made one thing crystal clear. They do not want the Science Centre being pulled out of their neighborhood and put downtown. And I have to say, I agree with them. I mean, I'm so sick and tired of politicians back of napkin sort of planning exercises without any consultation or discussion with the communities in which those decisions will have an impact. Why do we need to continue to concentrate all of the attractions, amenities, educational facilities in the downtown core? I mean, the Science Center's been there for 50 years. It's an important cultural and educational institution. You talk to the people in Flemington Park, those are summer jobs. It's camps for kids in the summer. It's a place for family gathering. And I think it's worked really well over the past 5 decades. I remember going there, you know, as a kid coming into the city from Hamilton on school trips, and that was really exciting. Now we take my daughter, she's 2, take her to the Science Center. So, you know, it smacks to me of a government and, you know, politicians who are disconnected from everyday people, and the idea that you would need to concentrate that down on the waterfront, ripping it out of that community, to me is just extremely out of touch. As mayor, I'll be fighting to keep the Science Center right where it is, because I think that's where it belongs.
Yeah, no, and that's certainly something that I have heard from so many people. Like, you know, Toronto is made up of many boroughs since amalgamation. So we have the folks from Scarborough, we have the folks up in North York, and having that space is really important because it's literally cuts your drive in half.
Yeah.
And the congestion and the parking and all of those things. And so,
and we're building transit to the Science Center. I mean, it's the end anchor of the Ontario line. There's a lot of reasons. You got the Japanese Cultural Center, you got the EGACon. There's actually the emergence of a cultural cluster there of different institutions and amenities. You take the Science Center out, I mean, the three-legged stool starts to fall fall over there. But again, it's just emblematic of downtown politicians and governments who are very disconnected from what people are thinking. And it's obvious. I know there were some candidates that sort of rushed to get the scoop on the province and get that out there right away. But I hope they're thinking carefully about that. I hope they're thinking about the community, because the community is certainly not happy about that. And I don't think it's in the best interest of the folks in Flemington and Thorncliffe. And I don't think it's in the best interest of the city.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen in consultation that I think that hasn't happened with this. So I think that's something that's really important. In terms of actionable change and what are you hearing at the doors?
I hear about affordability, honestly, and affordability is one of those things it's sort of it's ambiguous. It's okay, affordability. What does that mean? What can government do? What can the city do for affordability? But it's where people's heads are at. My best friend Paul, he lives in my basement and he makes, I don't know, $75,000 a year. He makes a good income, right? He makes good money. And he pays $1,000 a month rent. And he lives in the basement, not because he wants to, but that's all he can afford. And it goes back to a lack of rental construction, a lack of purpose-built rental, a lack of housing options here in the city. And it's so important that we solve for workforce housing when we talk about affordability. We've always had to take care of the most vulnerable. There are always people who are going to need extra help, varying degrees. Some people will need significant help. But again, it goes back to that idea of the hollowing out of the core. If we cannot ensure folks like Paul have access to housing, Paul's not going to live here anymore. He's going to live somewhere else. And if Paul's not living and working in this city, helping to grow our economy, doing those jobs that are so vitally important to our economic success, then Toronto's future prosperity is compromised. I met a couple up in East York, and at the beginning of the pandemic, they purchased their first place. They were renting, I think, Yonge and Lawrence, and then they moved into East York, a classic post-war bungalow. It's probably like 700 square feet, tight little one-bedroom, one-story house.
Yeah.
The plan was to renovate it at some point. Since then, they've had a baby. So, now the space is even tighter. The baby sleeps in the bed with them. And when they moved in, their mortgage was at one rate. Now they're paying $24,000 more a year in interest. So their mortgage went up $2,000 a month. And so cash flow is really tight. His partner's on mat leave, so they're down to 1.5 salary. And these are the challenges of affordability. Yeah. So when I talk about keeping property taxes at or below the rate of inflation, it's not because, the city doesn't want more money. It's because we have to be extremely conscientious about the affordability crunch for families, for seniors, for folks on a fixed income, where they don't just have the opportunity to, go into the trust fund and cash more money out because they need more money. They don't have more money. And I'm not convinced that people feel like they're getting way better value for services despite taxes going up by 25% over the past number of years. You're not seeing 25% improvements in your services, but you're definitely finding it harder and harder to get by in the city because groceries are up. Lineups at food banks have never been bigger. Yep. Your rent has gone up. Interest on your mortgage has gone up. All of the programming that, if you want to go out or if you're doing anything in the city, it's more expensive. And so I hope, as we move through this election, there's a real honest conversation. It's not just about more programs, more spending, but like, how are we going to manage spending? How are we going to live within our means as a local government, recognizing that our revenue tools are very limited and people are very stretched, and our budget has literally gone up $3 billion in 3 years. Not sustainable, guys. Let's be honest about that. Let's have a real conversation. And I know it's not popular to campaign on that stuff, but I think there is a financial reckoning coming, and you've certainly seen the federal government's walked away from us. The province has turned off the taps, and we're left holding the bag. We can't be everything to everyone, and we got to be honest about that.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is also, brings me to the question of public transit. And I mean, that has been a major source for income, for the city. But now when you have ridership down by 70%,
Yeah.
reducing lines and
Yeah.
like reducing the number of lines, especially in some high frequent areas where that's where our workforce is coming from.
Right.
It shifts up like opportunity costs. There's like income flow. People don't feel safe.
Yeah, I mean, and you'll hear a number of candidates that say, "Oh, I'm going to restore service levels on transit." You're kind of missing the point. Have you been on transit? I wonder if any of them ride transit. I ride transit all the time. When I ride transit, I go down to the platform at Yonge and Bloor, and I see everyone's backs against the wall. Why are their backs against the wall? Because they don't feel safe, because there's not a 0% chance that they could end up on the tracks. You know, people's heads are on a swivel because they don't know who's coming up behind them. That is why people are not riding transit. It's not because of, a 5% surface cut that means you wait 2 minutes longer on a weekend. It's because they literally don't feel safe riding transit. We have to restore safety to the TTC. We have a safe TTC plan which aims to do that. It's a combination of additional security presence, special constables supported by police officers. It's also the coordination of all of the different services that are available. Right now you have 20 plus different service providers for people experiencing homelessness or substance use or mental health crisis. None of that's coordinated. We need to do a much better job coordinating those services so that people can get the help when and where they need it. We're also talking about platform edge doors. And this comes back to City Hall has been debating and discussing this for 15 years. Platform edge doors. You do a quick Google search of transit systems around the world. They've all been able to do it, but not Toronto. And I know it's a big price tag, but you don't have to start with all 70 plus stations.
Yeah.
We could start with the busiest ones. You could start with the interchange stations and build that infrastructure as part of our 10-year capital program. And of course, the cellular service, it looks like we're making progress on that. But I would just say, one provider is not enough. Everybody has to have access to cellular service. That's table stakes in 2023. It's embarrassing that we haven't had that to date. And we need to usher in a level of accountability at City Hall that has not been there. And I'll be the type of mayor that gets that done.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that is, it speaks to the fact, when I'm on the subway, people are looking back like, okay, with their backs up. And I think that's really an astute observation and all of those pieces. And I definitely feel like, you're like, why haven't we done this? We need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Super Mayor Powers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I like it. I'm campaigning on it, being very honest and transparent, and I'll tell you why. There were some politicians that, to their credit, framed this as a discussion of, do you support democracy or do you support minority rule? I think it's more, do you recognize the challenges that are in front of us, and are you prepared to take the steps necessary to deal with them? If you read the regulations of the bill, which I know nobody does, it was always scoped around housing and infrastructure to support housing.
Yep.
You can't stand up in the council chamber and beat your chest and, decry the housing crisis. You can't just tweet about the housing crisis and then vote against housing. And I see that all the time. I saw it when I was in the chief planner's office as a staff member. I see it on council. You got a lot of politicians that talk a big game, but their actions come up so short. And so, I will be a strong mayor of action that will take the steps necessary to address the housing crisis, to build the infrastructure, to get the transit going. These are tools that are available to do that. But they're not the only tools. It's a style and an approach to leadership that demands accountability and demands action. And a strong mayor is, yes, someone who's not afraid of the legislation, but it's also someone who's not afraid to take a position on the floor of council and make the case. Strong mayor is also someone who's not afraid to sit around the table with dissenting perspectives and views and, be open to that criticism, be open to that feedback and change and evolve the position. I learn a lot more from listening to people than I do from talking. And so, I think that is what strong mayor is all about. And I think it's a recognition that, for far too long, city councils, politicians, local government has been a huge part of the problem. It has. We just have to be honest about that. The people who don't want to have that conversation, of course, is the politicians who have been around decades and been a big part of the problem. That's not me. I'm a professional urban planner. I've seen the challenges from the civil service side, and I've also been on council, long enough to diagnose the problems, understand how to fix it, but not so long that I'm complicit in the problems that we're dealing with. When you've been around that place for too long, you start to rationalize all the delay. You start rationalizing the positions that, frankly, in any other sector would not be acceptable. It's going to take us 5 years to update our registration program for Parks and Rec to get my daughter in swimming, or to get your kids in swimming.
Absolutely.
In what world would you accept that outcome other than local government and city bureaucracy? The answer is nowhere is that acceptable. And yet, time and time again, you see politicians rationalize the endless debate and delay. Let's get on with it. And so, some people will try and make this a ballot question. It's about outcomes. It is about driving outcomes. And if you want to see change, if you want to see action from City Hall, vote for Bradford, because I'm not afraid to bring the action. I'm not afraid to drive towards outcomes and make sure that we're delivering on things for Torontonians that actually matter, not just responding to the echo chamber of City Hall or whatever's trending on Twitter. We've been doing that for years, and I would suggest that it hasn't gotten us where we need to go.
Yeah, no. And I think that there are a bunch of people who would probably agree with you on that one for sure. It's change. We need change for sure. And that's why I think this mayoral race is like a big one. We've got 80 people on the ballot. And obviously only one person can be mayor, but I actually think there's a great opportunity for change, and to change the direction of Toronto is huge. It's actually important because, as you say, it could be hollowed out or it could be a thriving city. So is there anything else that you want to talk about in terms of your platform and stuff?
Well, again, it's with me, you will get someone who is going to respond to the issues that matter most to you. And I hear from thousands of Torontonians on this journey, it is affordability, it is community safety, and it is getting the city moving. We haven't really talked about getting the city moving, but one of the pieces is, I will stand up a congestion relief commissioner. And here in this part of the city where we are, on Gerrard Street, congestion is a real problem for people. It's nice if you can be a downtown councillor and tell everybody that they should just ride a bike or take transit. I ride bikes and take transit, but there's a lot of families out there that are not in that position. I was out in Scarborough Rouge this morning, and you can't take the transit that doesn't exist. And a lot of families or small business owners are in a car and they need that for work. And so I feel like the city has just given up on traffic congestion. We're just waving the white flag and sort of saying, mailing it in. In fact, the Toronto Star had a headline a couple weeks ago that just said, if you're planning on going downtown, don't drive. Well, I'm downtown every day, and I'll tell you what, I see a lot of cars downtown. Seems like a lot of people do drive downtown. Sometimes I'm walking around, I see more pylons than I see people, but there are a lot of people downtown, so we can't just give up. So the idea of having a congestion relief commissioner is one person who is solely in charge with coordinating all of the infrastructure projects across the city. Because Lakeshore in our neighborhood, you've got the city of Toronto doing the Gardiner, you've got the province doing the Ontario line, you've got the federal government doing flood protection at the Don. Literally nobody's in charge. None of that is coordinated, and the result is chaos. So you need someone to own the problem and to be focused on fixing it. That's a congestion relief commissioner. We will take 200 parking enforcement officers, redeploy them during rush hour into our 50 busiest intersections to get the traffic moving. That's within our existing complement. And all it's saying is, look, for your 8-hour shift, 2 of those hours, you're going to be flowing traffic rather than writing parking tickets. This is the common sense, practical sort of solutions that the city needs. It's not rocket science. It's just, thinking it through and being more strategic with the resources that we have, and acknowledging and recognizing that it's never been harder to get around Toronto. I'm not going to give up on that. I'm not going to give up on the people that, for whatever reason in their life circumstances, they're in a car. I think it's important, if we want to be a livable city, that's a city for everybody, no matter how you choose to get around. And, I think for too many years, a lot of Torontonians have felt like we've just given up on that. And I'm not prepared to do that. And so, I'll be a strong mayor of action addressing that for people as well.
Yeah, no, it is true when you share that, like, and actually put that into the context that, like, you drive down, you're like, what's this? What's happening? Why is this road all torn up? And
Yep.
people don't expect it.
Right.
And it just adds so much delay that, I mean, one day it took me 45 minutes to get downtown, whereas normally it's a 12-minute drive.
Right.
And
yeah. We're like a kilometer and a half from downtown. And it's 45 minutes. That's, the congestion in the GTA costs the economy $11 billion a year. So it's tough to show a throughput on that. But in terms of loss of productivity, that's 45 minutes that you're spending in your car, not being productive, not working, time away from your family. It's aggravation. You come home to your spouse and they ask how your day was. And I can't even talk about my day. I just spent 2 hours in the car in traffic.
It's true.
It's very frustrating. So the quality of life for people, there's a lot of things that go into that, but the ease or the frustration in which you experience getting around the city, that's a big part of it too.
No, and those are the day-to-day things, right? Like every single day your life is impacted by. And I think when I encourage people, like, think about who you're voting for, think about why you're voting. It's like, there's nothing like the moment you walk out your door, that's municipalities. Like, that's the impact, the infrastructure, all of those things. So I really appreciate you coming out and talking to me and sharing, your vision, and you're a man on a mission who's out to change the world, to change Toronto, and to affect change immediately. I always like to ask everyone, like, what's a quote that you go by or a guiding principle?
I don't know if it's, now I'm not going to get the quote precisely right, but I think JFK said something along the lines of everyone can make a difference and everybody ought to try. And I think that's so true when we talk about local government, when we talk about politics. There are so many amazing community leaders across the city, so many people making a difference, whether that is through small business or community leadership or through faith-based organizations. There are so many tremendous community leaders. There's so many different ways to make an impact. It doesn't always have to be politics, but just trying to make a positive difference, big and small. The cumulative impact of that is something really special. I think we see a lot of that in Toronto, and that's very much reflective of a strong, thriving city, is the community engagement and people trying to make things better.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's how we got engaged through civic action, right?
That's right.
It was a bunch of regular people that just want to be change makers.
That's right.
Thanks so much, Brad. I really appreciate you joining me today to talk about why Brad.
Thanks very much, Lee. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.